the center, and Adele Andrews, who is our Green New Deal Cities Hub Coordinator. Um, so I'm quickly going to provide you an overview around the center. We're a brand new organization. In fact, we're going to be launching in the next couple of weeks. Our fellows and our advisory board members come from all over the world and are leading voices in the climate justice movement. Once you look for us on our website in early May, and you can sign up for our newsletter. We have a number of forthcoming reports on Green New Deal cities, on voter suppression and climate justice, free trade agreements, the growing power of the political, what we call the polluter industrial complex, and the global climate refugee crisis, and many other reports and briefs. Everything we provide is free. So please look for us in 2 to 3 weeks as we launch. In our view, the goal of the environmental justice and climate justice movements is not to ensure that all people are polluted equally or that all people suffer the consequences of climate change in the same manner. Instead, at the center, our mission is really to address the root causes of the climate crisis and to transform the political economic structures of power that are the source of the climate justice crisis, develop what we call a more transformative climate justice politics. So to that end, we bring an intersectional analysis together that focuses on the links between class exploitation, systemic racism, misogyny, patriarchy, social injustices, the lack of respect for human rights, as well as neocolonialism, imperialism, neoliberalism, and particularly in today's day and age, corporate-led globalization. We look to strategize around how structures of economic exploitation and political domination and cultural oppression intersect in a mutually reinforcing fashion to worsen the ecological crisis. So in this sense, we are devoted to the development of what we call an emancipatory climate justice politics. And if we are really to have a truly just recovery from the pandemic and build a more economically secure and sustainable future for all of us, then an emancipatory Green New Deal politics offers us a path forward. And so that's why we're having this discussion today, is to illuminate what that might look like. So here we're showing you an overview in this slide of what we will be doing in today's session. We'll be sharing these slides, so if you miss something, you can find it later and we can go over it. So let's talk about what we're seeing in terms of Green New Deal resolutions, not just here in the United States, but in discussions taking place all over the world. And particularly why a Green New Deal might offer us a more transformative politics, a more transformative vision of how we can simultaneously address the climate crisis and foment a just recovery from the pandemic. Here in the United States, federal Green New Deal would shift about 100% of our power demand to renewable resources and energy sources to build smarter power grids, and would invest in various types of clean technologies. So one key principle is energy democracy and energy justice. Federal Green New Deal should also support more sustainable family farming, create a healthier food system, promote a regenerative agroecology, should also invest in mass transportation systems which are electric, non-polluting, and affordable and accessible to the larger public. Green New Deal should also restore biodiversity, should protect ecosystems, it should invest in projects for climate resiliency, because we know climate change is coming. It should help preserve lands and revitalize formerly degraded and polluted lands into new productive uses for society. A Green New Deal should create millions of high-wage jobs, jobs at a living wage. It should provide a just transition for labor into the new economy, should protect workers' rights to unionize, and institute fair trade rules to foster domestic manufacturing and a new clean green economy. The key point here is what I would like to emphasize is that a Green New Deal is really dependent, whether you're talking in the United States or anywhere else in the world, on popular mobilization. that popular mobilization at the local level is critical to implementing this agenda. A Green New Deal cannot just be top down. It also has to be bottom up. And that towns and cities must be partners in building a truly transformative Green New Deal politics, which is capable of solving the real problems felt by people from all walks of life, where they live, work, and play. So I would also like to say a few more things about the need for local Green New Deals that don't often find their way into the political discourses in movement circles. And that is why it is really important to act locally around a Green New Deal. And in our view at the center, the cities can be more responsive, democratic, and even radical locales for political mobilization. Grassroots mobilization is the key to strengthening genuine participatory democracy. We have this notion of what distinguishes an active citizenship from a passive citizenship. So a passive citizenship or membership in an organization, yeah, you may sign a petition and occasionally write a letter to elected politician. But if you're an active member, if you're an active citizen, then you're involved in the actual decision-making of the organization or of the community. You're coming together to help construct a vision and a plan for the organization or for the community. So Green New Deal politics at the local level embodies the need for active citizenship, people taking control and feeling empowered at the local level, so they can bring real improvements in their own lives. We know that there's a situation now, particularly under the way of neoliberalism globally, that corrosive disadvantages are creating injustices that are begetting more injustices. We have to begin to break the cycle. And I think a Green New Deal framework can become a vehicle for not only furthering racial injustice, ensuring Black Lives Matter here in the United States, or fostering social and economic justice principles all over the world. It's a critical means for ending neoliberalism in favor of more democratic planning that is truly oriented to meeting the needs of the community. And very often, those of us who engage in movement politics, we've been led to believe that larger, more meaningful interventions would be too disruptive or not politically feasible. Yet what we see here in the United States and all over the world is that the flood of new proposals for free transit, eviction moratoriums, or income adjusted utility payments to small business grants, or renewable energy and energy democracy, or grassroots mutual aid societies are rapidly being implemented all across this country and around the world. And it shows that this mythology is simply not true, that we can think big at the local level and win. We see that the congressional stimulus bills that are being offered in the United States alone are not going to save our cities. I'm going to ask that someone is on that mutes. Please mute your background. Thank you. So congressional stimulus bills alone are not going to save our cities. We need federal action, but many ways federal action here has left many critical areas of intervention unaddressed, including issues around affordable housing or universal health care, as well as climate change and food access and economic recovery for both workers and small businesses. So we see here in the United States and around the world that many cities are now taking bold steps to fill this void and offer a more transformative vision, and that this is really essential to a genuine just recovery. So finally, the urgency of climate justice. It's important to remember that, for example, here in the United States, the federal Green New Deal proposal is a resolution. It really doesn't explain how to get there, especially at the scale necessary for a just recovery from the devastation of the pandemic. The details for this green print must be filled in by communities from all over this country, and for a global Green New Deal from communities all over the world. And so we then ask, what are local Green New Deals for a just recovery? We have constructed one for Boston. It's for Boston. It'll be one of our first reports coming out from the Global Center for Climate Justice. We feel that there are many parts of that could serve as a model for cities all over the world, and Nina will get into that in greater detail, as well as Adele. But these local Green New Deal initiatives illustrate ways that we can marshal the full power of city governments. They offer visions and action plans and programs and strategies for empowering communities. They provide a vision and a strategy for tackling institutional change while meeting the real needs of residents. So at the center, we really see it as essential that we can change the narrative about what is and what is not possible at the local level. We firmly believe that you can achieve big things at the local level and that we must. And by doing so, we can inspire countless other communities all over the United States and all over the world. Um, we firmly believe that this historical moment calls for bold progressive change, recognizing that we already have the vision, the policy tools, and community mobilization necessary to create a local Green New Deal and just recovery for everyone. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Nina and Adele, who will be talking about the vision in greater details. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Danny, and hi, everyone. Danny will be monitoring the chat from here on out to gather your questions, which we'll take at the end. So I'm going to go through the power of cities, talk a little bit about the D&D Hub itself, and Adele will wrap out our presentation. And so I want to start with the power of cities. So in a world where we see increasing centralization of power at the state level, at the national level, at the international level, it can be easy to forget about the power and influence of cities. And it's important that we run through these powers and show the broad impact that cities have on a day-to-day basis in our lives. There are more powers than you think that a city has, and there's almost no aspect of our lives that is not touched by a city and city government. So I'm going to run through these as kind of an overview. Hopefully it will be interesting to you all. The first one is direct spending. So that's the programs and people that cities invest in on a year-to-year basis, including our schools and the programs that they present, fire, police, road infrastructure, and so forth. The second one is municipal assets, and that means the hard infrastructure, the roads, the buildings, the schools, the ports, the airports. Cities own a lot of hard infrastructure, and when we invest in public infrastructure that's knitted into all of our communities, including parks and playgrounds, we're investing in the health, well-being, and prosperity of the people that rely on them and use those assets. The third one is capital projects and investments. So capital projects have multi-year budgets. They're another way of showing our values, and they're a reflection of our values. And investments, when I talk about investments, that means our investments in pension funds. Is the city invested in private prisons? Is it invested in gun manufacturing? Is it invested in fossil fuels? Who is holding our municipal insurance? Are those companies also invested in something destructive, or are they invested in something that will then promote social and ecological resilience at the city level? Another one is zoning and land use. This is a very powerful tool. And it's not the existence of these policies that is important, but their execution. Where is the affordable housing being built in the city? Is a city being densified, or are new neighborhoods only single family zoning? And it is through zoning and land use that cities sometimes have a once in a generation chance to envision what an entire neighborhood is going to look like for decades to come. It's a very important tool and power. Another one is procurement and contracting. Are municipal dollars going to large businesses? Are they going to foreign companies and corporations? Or are we contracting with small businesses, local businesses in the community, Black and brown led businesses, minority businesses, and women owned businesses. That is a policy choice. And taxation, the power ultimately lies in how taxes are wielded. Taxes can be punitive or they can be artfully used to nudge people in a pro-social and pro-ecological way by taxing unwelcome externalities, like parking in an area that could be car-free, or taxing excessive waste or water use for larger companies, for example. Another one is local legislation. So those are the ordinances and resolutions that are passed at a city council level. You may not think that that's a big power, but it is. Over 50 cities and county governments have already passed living wage ordinances across the US. There are others that have implemented paid sick time, like they mandate the employers in their city provide paid sick time, and fair hiring practices that can be done through local ordinances. Incentives is another one, and that is cities can use financial, permitting, and land use incentives to encourage desired behaviors. So one example of that is a community benefits agreement when you have a large developer coming in that then has to make sure that whatever the development is, it's meeting community needs. Perhaps a certain percentage of affordable housing, some money set aside for a community health center, for example, right? Building in that just recovery aspect of a Green New Deal. And finally, the last power of a city is advocacy. And this one tends to get not as much attention. It tends to get a little bit ignored. But cities represent tens of thousands, often hundreds of thousands to millions of residents. They have a bit of a bully pulpit, and they can use that in state legislation making. They can use that at the national level to push for investments and for federal dollars. And even at the international level, where we see coalitions of cities like C40 making an impact on international agreements. So I'm moving on to introduce the Green New Deal Resource Hub, and I wanted to do so by giving you all a background of how we got into this work. So in 2019, we had the introduction of the Federal Green New Deal Resolution, which was introduced by Senator Markey and Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. That was one of the inspirations for our 2020 work in Boston, creating the Green New Deal and Just Recovery Plan for Boston, which I believe Adele has shared in the chat. Feel free to read through it at any time, it's great. So a lot of that was influenced by the federal Green New Deal and the principles surrounding that work. In 2020 and even before, we also began to see the growth of local coalitions and cities exploring the space and exploring this question: how do we take this great idea, the Federal Green New Deal, and how can we implement it at the local level? Like, we're nimble, we can work on this too. And so in January 2021, we started to build out this Green New Deal Cities Resources Hub, realizing that we can begin to connect these coalitions and cities across the US as well as internationally, sharing resources and laying the groundwork for some very interesting conversations over the next couple of years. So right now we're in phase 1, which means we're really reaching out to coalitions and cities and seeing kind of where they're at in terms of their campaigns. What are they looking for? What are their roadblocks in terms of implementation? How far are they along? And kind of mapping out the geographies of Green New Deal action. So in 2020, June of this year, we will be officially launching the hub. You can find it at that time at www.gndcities.org, and that will be really phase 1. It will have all kinds of different resources on different issue areas and strategies when we launch. And then later in late 2021 and going into 2022, we'll begin to have more specific conversations with individuals who are working in the space and coalitions, getting into how do you take an idea or a framework like the Green New Deal and implement it, right? It's one thing to create a report. It's another thing to pass something at the local level that is comprehensive, that is intersectional, that ties together racial and economic justice, a just recovery, and climate action. So this is really phase 2, and Adele will talk about that a little bit. but we'll be producing some summaries of what we've learned from people's conversations and some toolkits in late 2021 and early 22 around that. So now that you all have an understanding of where we're at, what is this hub? And it really is a virtual space for activists, for officials, policy experts to reference and connect as they work on their local Green New Deals. We are not trying to be prescriptive. We're trying to give folks as many resources as possible to help them, no matter where they are in their Green New Deal just recovery implementation process at the local level. And we've intentionally designed this resource to show the deep intersectionalities and intersections between different urban issues. So between housing and climate change, housing and energy efficiency, racial justice and transportation, so that people begin to see how the issues that they've worked on for so many years tie into a Green New Deal, a just recovery. And the point of our resource hub is to really democratize access to very user-friendly and engaging information, discussions, and help folks plug into this growing organic network of people who are interested in implementing Green New Deals in their local communities. And our aim is really to elevate and center ideas that are coming up from the grassroots. And we're not afraid to point out some of the shortcomings of the G&D framework. And there are some, right? And it's important to engage in that conversation. We must be aware that the Green New Deal frame, if not implemented correctly, can be co-opted and can just become another form of green capitalism and extractivism. And we want to be very aware that a Green New Deal implemented badly can lead to further privatization and further injustice. So we'll be having some resources on the website and some critiques for people to be aware of that the Green New Deal isn't a be-all end-all, and we need to be very, very conscious about some of the potential drawbacks if not implemented correctly. And so why are we creating this hub? And there are two main reasons. One is so that coalitions and cities are not reinventing the wheel in their different localities, right? For each coalition, forming a network and gathering ideas is extremely time intensive and resource intensive. And so we want to gather as much information, as much knowledge and connections on the back end we can to provide these people with information so they can really hit the ground running once they have that seed, that Green New Deal seed, and they're ready to explore a Green New Deal idea at the local level. We want to be the water and the sunlight and the fertilizer to help them get to the next step and help create those connections for them. The other reason for creating the hub is that realistically, city departments, city council staff, they don't often have a lot of time and resources, particularly in the US, to do background research, to connect with, people who have these intersectional lenses when they're implementing policy. And this is so critically important when we're talking about a big project like a Green New Deal, because it has such long-term implications. And it's very necessary that we not only create good programs for right now, good policies, but we're also thinking about how we need to address the structural and institutional injustices that exist within the city. Sometimes city councils aren't really interested in doing that. And so it's good and it's necessary that they have exposure to what other coalitions are working on and this information in an accessible way. So our hub operates by the following 7 principles, but you'll find we post a lot of other principles documents on our website too. We're not looking to be prescriptive. These are the principles that we operate by, but other folks, other coalitions, their principles are the Thrive Agenda principles. They operate by the Just Recovery principles. So we will actually have a portion of the website where different principles are shared so folks can see what works for them, what makes sense in their local context, and what are some of their local coalitions advocating for in terms of the principles that are important to them. So I'm going to run through these and describe what they mean to us. So we will be sharing works that are people-centered. That means prioritizing workers and communities. It means putting people before profit. It means building solidarity across racial, ethnic, and class lines. So the way we approach this work is to move beyond identity and also include a power and class analysis in the Green New Deal work that we post on the Hub. The second principle is we're seeking works that are democratic and participatory, that define procedural justice. How is the community engaged in this Green New Deal process, but also in the plans going forward, so that they're not just included in the idea formation stage, but they'll be included later on in city processes, and they're embedded into the decision making long term. We'll also be sharing works that address the root causes. And by that, that means looking at systemic and institutional injustices that exist in the city. What are some departmental practices that have led to injustice? What are some programs that are racist and need to be abolished? What are some other ones that we need to audit and reform? And begin to talk about reparative and transformative ways of approaching not only programs, but the way our internal city processes function. The fourth is rights-based. So that basically means upholding the social contract between a government and its people. We're paying taxes, right? What is the government giving to us in return for the taxes that we pay as residents of a city? We have a right to public transit, accessible public transit. We have a right to clean air and water, nutritious food, healthcare, and worker protections. We're holding up works that are rights-based. 5 is to decommodify society and nature. And primarily that means eliminating or working to eliminate the market pressures placed on public services. So some of the works that we uphold are public banking, municipalization, which is when a city seeks to buy from a private energy company the energy and utility infrastructure and run it in a city department. And so and also cities that promote cooperative housing and free public transit. So we seek to promote the commons as opposed to privatized solutions. 6 is social and ecological resilience. These are intimately tied, and you can't have one without the other. And we need to make sure that we're not only working for a sustainable and regenerative urban ecosystem, but understand how that affects the social ecosystem in our neighborhoods as well. And finally, we'll be promoting works that are justice oriented. So looking at works that equitably share power in a city and coalitions that are looking for equitable power sharing, looking to restructure or audit those unjust structures in the system and create a city that purposefully is working for everyone. So on this slide, this is a bit of a teaser of folks that we've been reaching out to so far in the past couple of months. Some of the cities, the Green New Deal coalitions, and the organizations and practitioners that we've been in contact with so far. And every couple of days, there's like a new coalition or a city that we hear of that is interested in exploring the space. Recently, I heard about Gulf South for a Green New Deal. Now, this is incredible. This is a coalition of like 50 organizations in Texas, Florida, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama, and they're coming together in pursuit of a radical Green New Deal platform. It's incredible. And so what I want to do here is really show you that there's a diverse and dynamic local Green New Deal space that is forming, and rapidly so. And so you see coalitions like Reimagine Appalachia, located in the Appalachian states, that have a focus on jobs and middle-class prosperity and the restoration of nature. Some other coalitions and cities may have other priorities. So for example, in Seattle, Washington, they've already passed a local Green New Deal resolution, and now they're looking to implement a comprehensive transportation plan that really embodies those Green New Deal resolution goals. So that's really, really interesting work that's happening right now. Renew New England is another coalition that has a big focus on creating unionized jobs and housing justice and food access. So you can see that depending on the locales and what different communities need, you'll have different principles and you'll have different priorities for the Green New Deal work. And on the right is just a very short list of some of the organizations that we've been connecting with that have deep expertise in one of these different issue areas, and they can lend a hand in helping localities think through what are the possibilities of a local Green New Deal? What are some potential transformative programs, policies, departmental audits, and so forth, and ways of doing things that may be useful to their local Green New Deal work. So here I'm sharing with you an overview of the structure of the hub, which is not quite launched yet, but it will be launched in 2 months, which we're very excited about, working hard on the back end. And so this is kind of a sneak peek before launch. But ultimately, all of these resources are intended to instigate conversations at the local level. And what we want to do is go beyond the problem analysis. We all know climate change is an issue. We all know that there are deep and structural urban inequalities and injustices. But what we're trying to do is go beyond the problem analysis and thinking about and sharing what are some emancipatory intersectional solutions, either that are still existing in like the minds of activists and researchers, or have been implemented for a long time in cities and localities for decades that we can learn from. So for example, in my hometown, in Utah, they've had free public transit for 40 years, and they've done it. They've been able to pay for it, and they're well on their way to full electrification of their transportation system as well. So this is not revolutionary. In many ways, a lot of this work has already been done. And so it's just about sharing all of the good work that's happening around the world, whether it's Paris's 100 hectares of urban gardening project in the city, or there are a couple of cities in Latin America that have rapidly expanded their bike infrastructure in a very meaningful way during the COVID-19 pandemic. We can learn a lot from each other. And so if you think about campaigns and actions locally as seeds kind of strewn across this country and around the world, the hub and the way we're positioning ourselves is coming in and being some of that water, some of that sunlight and fertilizer to add momentum to these movements. And so to kind of give an overview of the rest of what's on this slide, the two main resources that we'll have on the website are going to be grouped into issue areas and strategy insights. So issue areas will be things like projects, webinars, sample policies, and case studies on like social housing or transit justice or racial injustice at the level of the city. Strategy insights will be trying to get at answering those how questions. How do you fund a Green New Deal? How do you build a local coalition for a Green New Deal? How do you get unions on board? And some of those really nitty gritty how questions that are of absolute importance to Green New Deal coalitions, no matter where they are at the stage of implementation. And so right now we're in phase 1. We're gathering info, we're surveying the landscape regionally, nationally, and beginning to survey the landscape internationally. So if anyone has examples of that, we would absolutely be thrilled to hear those international examples. And phase 2 is the summer and fall. So we'll be developing strategy toolkits that get a little bit more at the how question. Adele's going to talk about that just a little bit after me. And then phase 3, which is going to be in the fall, in the winter and beyond, is channeling the resources that we've built out in the network on our back end and hosting discussions on issue area topics, on strategies, and in a way that would be most helpful and really helping to build those coalitions so that they're ready for success and they have the resources they need to overcome those barriers because they have the people through our network that they can learn from and have access to the right tools. So we've shared this slide through the chat. I won't have an opportunity to run through all of these beautiful slides that Adele has created. But you get a little bit of a sneak peek of all of the different issue areas that will be on the hub. These slides talk about how housing, food, and a just recovery, how they're all intimately tied to climate action and what cities can do at the local level. You can see some of the examples listed at the bottom: community gardens, regenerative agriculture, farm stand accepting federal SNAP benefits. So I'll run through these very quickly, but I encourage you all to look through the PowerPoint as well and really engage with the information. And the examples are all things that already exist in cities. For the Boston Green New Deal plan that we wrote up last year, these are all already existing examples. This is not in the theoretical realm. So if you see any examples listed, they come from previous coalition wins at the local level. So there's a lot here. But I'm going to hand it over to Adele now, and they'll be talking about really phase 2 of our Green New Deal hub build out, how we get from a Green New Deal idea to implementation.
Thank you, Nina. Yeah, again, I'm Adele. I am the Green New Deal Cities Resource Hub Coordinator for the Center. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're focusing on right now, which is our strategies section, where we're asking a lot of the how questions on how to get from ideas to implementation on a Green New Deal in a city. And this is where we found, one of the reasons we're focusing on this is we found that there was a bigger gap in resources around this area. In many ways, a fully implemented Green New Deal city would be a monumental and unprecedented accomplishment. And so to build this out, what we're really looking for is identifying the steps and phases along the path to the Green New Deal and the challenges that come up in each of these phases and how we can provide frameworks and solutions in each of them. So some of the phases we've identified as of now in some of our research and outreach, even though this will be different for every city, are looking forward to building a coalition that is inclusive and is powerful, defining that transformative vision, where to look to identify those local barriers in each context, how to use political pressure to move this forward, achieving those interim successes that really connect and show the stake that the broader population has in these plans. Then continuing to monitor progress, reevaluate goals. How can we really disrupt those oppressive structures and create more transformative plans moving forward, and going all the way to achieving that longer term change in cities. So next slide, Nina. Thank you. So the way that we are working to build this out is through our current outreach. We're reaching out to a lot of different organizations and have 2 rounds of outreach. In the first round of outreach, what we're looking for is what really are those needs on the ground, how can we support people, and where people are really at. Some of the results that we've had from our outreach so far, we've really been able to ask people about the challenges they're facing and directly what resources would be helpful to them. Some of the main challenges groups have been facing are with capacity, both within coalitions for Green New Deal, but also when working with others and trying to build coalition, especially grassroots groups and marginalized communities that have been hit hard by COVID. A lot of people are in survival mode and trying to provide immediate support to their communities. And there's a balance between including these groups meaningfully and prioritizing them, while also respecting their capacity and time. Money is another barrier, as is resistance from state government, both very directly and explicitly, but also in the level of political will and willingness to take risks that exist in state government. And also there often is some stasis after the initial resolution is passed, and actually moving forward into implementation can be a barrier for a lot of groups. Things that have been identified on what we can provide and what we can do to feed in the gaps. A lot of it is around just connecting the dots on these things, connecting the big Green New Deal plan and this big vision to like what this will actually look like in people's lives and what will it mean to them personally. Storytelling, the idea of storytelling and that being something we need to do has been mentioned by a couple of people. Another part of connecting the dots is connecting how like what does the Green New Deal and what does that framework mean for cities? Because the federal Green New Deal is a lot more prominent and the dots to what that would mean in a city hasn't been fully fleshed out, as well as how these different issue areas like transportation and like housing would connect to a Green New Deal city and why they're an integral part of them. Another thing that we've been told that we can provide is providing that knowledge of what's generally happening in the space. I think groups that are going forward towards their own goals have trouble keeping like track of all of the initiatives that are going on and what their goals are. And there is a role for us there as well. Another is making connections between people that have similar goals or are working for similar things. One way that we can split this up is bringing people together to who are leading these efforts to identify what their areas of shared struggle are, where they're learning things, and where are the places that they can learn and try things together, both for them and also so we can start building out these frameworks and phases. And additionally, within these interviews, though we're still in the first phase, we have started learning a bit of things about strategy, which move us into the next phase, where we are looking into what the solutions are on the ground. We're going to be selecting case studies and conducting interviews around those and trying to uplift those successful political strategies around some of the barriers that we have identified in communities. And next slide. So that gets us into some of our next steps. So that second round of outreach is going to move us into writing those toolkits based on strategies that will live in the strategy section of our hub. We're also working towards building a network of Green New Dealers who are interested in providing support for others in their efforts. We're going to be hosting one-on-one conversations and larger conversations around those different issues. And we're going to continuously be refining the hub based on the feedback that we receive throughout our outreach. And then the last part is how people can get involved in this. So we are looking to support the work of organizations. Even if it's explicitly about local Green New Deals, that's great, but we're also interested in people who have technical expertise in any of those subject areas and have any experience organizing transformative change around issues. We'd love to uplift that, but also to us on our end, we'd love to receive feedback and people's thoughts. We do have a feedback form, which I will send in the chat in a second, where you can send that feedback and or also there's a place to sign up for updates if you would like that. And send that right now. And I think next slide. And yeah, so thank you. That was our presentation for today. We're going to move into answering some questions people may have. And thank you so much for being here. Nina, did you have anything else to add?
No, thanks, Adele, for wrapping that up. We're still at the very beginning stages of launching our fledgling new nonprofit. So we'll really have an online presence in the coming months, but I definitely recommend following us on Facebook, or sorry, not Facebook, Twitter and Instagram at Center for CJ. And definitely sign up through the feedback form if you want updates around this work and all of our other work. We're very, very interested to hear your feedback and to keep in touch with you all. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we can get into some questions.
So yes, we'll go over some questions. How much time do we have remaining here? We have till what? 3:50?
We have about 12 minutes.
Okay. So we have an interesting question. It's specific here, but one comes from Dave Bradley. And that is with regard to how electricity pricing systems work. And how does that work for and against building renewable energy electricity systems, for example, in the greater Boston area? And I don't know, do you want to take that on, Nina, or do you want me to take a stab at that?
I can start, and then if you want to add on to that, feel free to do so. So equitable energy pricing in Boston has been a big concern, and one of the things that a lot of coalitions have been working on recently through community choice energy. So community choice energy sets aside a certain percentage of the energy that the city receives, and that is bought like more wholesale, that is renewable energy. And if you do it as a collective, as a city, you can actually get a more affordable price. But other cities have come about this in a different manner. So Boulder, Colorado, for example, is looking at municipalization of its energy infrastructure. So what it wants to do is, as a city, buy the energy provider out, so that you take the profit incentive out of providing energy to people. And it would come under city control. But what that means, very interestingly, is that it also comes under democratic control. So now the city is much more responsible and reviewed by the residents themselves. And there are a bunch of other plans in different shapes and forms in cities across the US and beyond to help make energy more affordable, particularly throughout the pandemic. I'm spacing on the cities specifically, but some of them have given sort of like energy fee moratoriums, where like someone cannot be kicked out of their home during the pandemic because they're not keeping up with their energy utility bills. Danny, did you want to add anything onto that?
Yeah, I just think what the question really gets at is, for example, what would constitute an emancipatory climate justice politics around energy? And so one manifestation of that, I would think, for example, and there's currently many states in the United States that have net metering laws, where if you install solar and export that onto the grid, your meter runs backwards and either you build up credit or perhaps even the utility sends you a check at the end of the month. And so think about that. That's where you transform yourself from being just an energy consumer to an energy producer. You become the owner of your own energy. And so when we think about conceptions of what constitutes affordable housing, it's not necessarily just how much rent you pay or how much the housing costs, but how much does it cost to power that home? And so an emancipatory climate justice politics seeks to democratize energy systems, turn consumers into producers, and in many ways liberate them as much as possible from the utilities. We want to democratize the utility systems, but if you can become the owner of your own energy, then that's the type of vision that can inspire people to embrace a Green New Deal politics.
Yeah, one more thing to add to that. And then there's a great question from Wayne on what do you mean by emancipatory that I'll give to you, Danny. So the other thing that I would add to that is there's two other ways to do this, where a city can invest in capital projects and in its own energy sourcing, whether that's solar, wind, geothermal, or otherwise. There are some cities in Connecticut that are looking into geothermal and then providing that at a cheaper rate to residents, right? That's then publicly owned and doesn't require full municipalization. And then there's also what's called property assessed clean energy, which allows private individuals to put solar on their roofs and not pay anything up front and just add it as an adder onto their property taxes. So you pay it off over the course of 30 years. So that's another way where you can then own your own system with the help of your municipality.
And I think what's interesting about this, again, with you bringing sort of an emancipatory vision to this, and this is what I'll discuss a little bit more, but this is seen as a threat by the oil and gas industry and the Koch brothers and so forth. And so the American Legislative Exchange Council and other entities associated with what I call the polluter industrial complex are trying to roll back these laws that exist in states all over the country around net metering, around the democratization of energy systems, around the transitions to renewable energies. Robert Poland just did a study And it's estimated, he's at the Political Economy Research Institute, and he and Chomsky have a new book out on a global Green New Deal, a really excellent book. And they look at the economics of this. And the reality is that the reason fossil fuel dominates right now so much of the electricity system has a lot to do with the political economic power of the industry. The massive subsidies it receives, which are close to $1 trillion in direct subsidies globally from governments all over the world. If it was a level playing field right now, fossil fuels cannot compete with renewable energy technologies in terms of efficiencies. But all the costs, the healthcare costs, the cost of damage, or what are called externalities, run into the trillions of dollars. That's the damage that's being done to the larger society and the environment by fossil fuels is enormous. But those are rendered invisible in these accounting measures. So an emancipatory politics around energy, energy democracy, energy justice is about treating access to clean energy as a fundamental right of citizenship, and that it's a social priority. And so that to do so means taking on some of the most powerful corporations in the world to try and institute a new energy system, which puts people first, which puts the global climate first, not profits. And so emancipatory politics looks at the way in which issues of class exploitation or economic injustice overlap with issues of social, racial injustice, as well as issues of gender and patriarchy. We know Jenny Stevens, one of our fellow, has a new book out on energy democracy and the gendered components. So we want to look at how different power structures interact and often reinforce one another, unjust power systems. And so we need to take a more comprehensive approach so that any solution we adopt doesn't make some other problem worse. It's part of really addressing the root causes. And so some of the questions we have are on technical points around some of the programs around Green New Deal, different types of technologies and so forth, which are spot on. And the notion here is that often when you see these imperfections in the technical design of various programs, there are manifestations of those sort of hidden power relations and those injustices that are working beneath the surface. So finding truly emancipatory types of technologies are the ones that address these hidden costs. Okay. Any other questions? Let's see.
Yeah, there was a question around
State initiatives on Green New Deal, for example.
And unincorporated communities that, is not like an urban area. And what I would absolutely recommend is checking out whether there are coalitions in your area that that cover your locality. And there are so many coalitions, at least in the US. There's actually one in Europe too, which is Green New Deal for Europe. I would recommend checking them out as well. So checking out the coalitions, they tend to be at a state or regional level, but you'll see for coalitions, there's usually between 10 and like 60 organizations covering those regions that are working in concert on Green New Deals in that area. So that's what I would recommend for folks who are not specifically like in a city.
Okay. Any other questions?
Any other questions that folks might have?
What, Nina, I was asking you when it came up in the presentation, what do you think, if you were to give a couple of, what do you think are some of the most powerful examples of cities that have implemented what you can see as a component of what would constitute a Green New Deal? Are there a couple of different examples that really jump out at you that can help create a vision of what that might look like?
Yeah, and there's no way to compare cities. This is really apples to oranges, right? It needs to be locally specific to meet local needs. But you see in Seattle, for example, they passed this incredibly refreshing, very progressive Green New Deal resolution. It had a huge coalition behind it. It had unions behind it as well. And so they were one of the first cities that successfully got that through their city council. And now they're working on what that looks like in reality in these different issue areas. So for example, in transportation, and what that means in Seattle is they're looking to block major portions of downtown from car access, for example. In other cities, you have Vienna's example around social housing, where I believe it's up to 2/3 of Vienna, Austria's housing is social housing, whether in cooperative form or owned by the city and rented out at an affordable rate, which means that the last third that's private is also, for the most part, relatively affordable. And so Vienna is that has existed for many, many decades, and housing advocates, particularly folks who worked on the federal Green New Deal for housing, love the Vienna example. Yeah, there are a bunch of other ones. Detroit and Chicago, this is more in the just recovery realm, but they have been doing a lot, both pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, to support their small business economies and communities. Chicago through, I believe it's like the Industrial Foundation of Near West Chicago or something like that. It's a city run outfit and in a partnership with a bunch of larger local employers to provide technical expertise, legal expertise for starting a small business, startup space. And so even in our Green New Deal for Boston plan, we were taking examples from all over the US and even beyond. And so it's really, it comes down to what cities want to implement and want to pick and choose in terms of what meets their needs under the heading of a Green New Deal.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And thank you everyone for attending. We hope you found this to be informative. We certainly welcome all of you to, again, check out the Global Center for Climate Justice once we launch toward the end of this month and the early part of May. We welcome your participation, and hopefully together we can give a lot of energy to the Green New Deal movement at the local and city level all across the world. So we welcome you to become part of this effort. Thanks once again. Thank you to our speakers, Nina Schlegel and Adele Andrews. I'm Daniel Faber. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. From here, thanks for participating. You'll be heading to a session, if you'd like, of 30 minutes of music and